I mean, the time to worry, I felt like was 5 years ago when I was seeing kids with iPads on leashes in airports. Kevin, what are your thoughts on the government's role in regulating AI?
So
And
I think the first thing you got to think about when you're talking about the government regulating AI would be what does it mean to regulate AI? And there's a few different camps in this topic. And the first one is creating something like a FDA or FAA for AI. So essentially, any new model that comes out, the government would have to review first, check for safety, um, and whatnot. And then the
interesting.
set Yeah, and then the second type would be something like a KYC, a know your customer for AI companies. So essentially, when you have a new user sign up, the AI company would be responsible for collecting information about who is using it. In case something were to go wrong, they'd be able to trace the person back. Um, and then what's similar, but I'm not going to include in this conversation, is things like export controls um, for things like NVIDIA's top chips and exporting that to China. That's just a whole other conversation. And then there's also people talking about regulating specific use cases for AI, like cybersecurity, um, creation of new viruses, weapons, and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. So when it comes to the regulation of it, I just out of curiosity, how much of this do you actually see as being possible to handle on the front end, rather than will it be a consistent putting fires out after they spawn, or can it actually be something like the FAA does, where they can evaluate and stress test the planes and stress test all the air traffic controllers before they license them and before they give them the go ahead to be put into production?
Yeah, and the thing is, if you do something like that with the FAA or the FDA, once the government gets into regulating something like that, it slows the process down by years many times. Like, how long does it take Boeing to get a new plane approved by the FAA? Probably
Good
many
point.
years.
Yeah.
So you probably don't really want the government having a say in approving models in the final state. So I don't think it really will make too much sense to have uh, something like the FAA or FDA for AI models, just because it'll slow down our lead against countries like China. And if we do slow down our lead against countries like China, it's not going to stop them from progressing ahead. And then realistically, the same risks of cyber attacks, bioweapons, and just countries gaining expertise in creating weapons that can cause destruction to us will significantly or will still be a problem even if we try to regulate it ourselves. It'll only shoot us in the foot, I would think.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of a good point that I see. I mean, like, one of the things that it seems like with AI, with the progression of technology in particular, is the cat's out of the bag when it comes to globalism. And you can't really, or the genie's out of the bottle for that matter. You can't put it back in. And as much as you'd like to, eh, particularly with these AI models, try to keep them under wraps and keep them from being accessed by Chinese nationals or North Korean nationals or whatever it may be. It does seem like some of these things are too far gone at this point, or maybe not too far gone, but the the trends and forces of the world, the global economy, have just developed in a way now where we can't really just relegate Claude to just being used by American users. We can't just relegate chat to being used by American users or American users of American allies. And that's in some ways, that's kind of scary to address because while the US after World War II and for about 100 years had this technological lead on everybody and technological lead in the Cold War, we don't necessarily have that hegemony anymore. And AI sort of levels that as well too, where it can just draw upon knowledge from so many different sources and improve itself, uh, just based on just without the need for a group of scientists or a group of researchers being relegated to one geography. So,
Yeah, definitely. I think you might be able to do some stuff around controlling who could use it. I think that's kind of where the know your customer stuff comes in, because if you have to require to use Claude or OpenAI, if you have to upload like United States government issued ID or something like that and scan your face, um, like you would if you were signing up for a new bank account or something like that, then I think they actually could get pretty good controls over who's using it. Um,
Sure.
I'm sure
Yeah.
there'll be bad. I mean, if you're a bad actor, state bad actor like China or Iran, I mean, you probably have means to create a fake ID of sorts and scan
Or
yourself
file off
in.
the dark web, or,
Yeah,
you know,
or even just pay Americans to give them access to their account or something like that.
right.
Like there would be ways around it, but it would probably limit the access a good amount. And I think it would minimally help with certain issues like, the companies like Anthropic and OpenAI worry about foreign actors like China and their labs there distilling their models and stealing it. And I think it could at least help with that because each account has a limit on the amount of tokens that it can spend. And so if a few people were to give their account access to someone in China, they could distill it a little bit, but you need a lot of prompts and
Right.
responses to distill it.
Yeah. True. That's a fair point. I guess um I guess one of the other things too is how do you how how would any regulator look at like actually keeping the AI controlled and making sure that the models are not like an existential risk prior to them being launched? That's another curious uh,
Yeah.
point that I have in my head.
Yeah, like how if the model is smarter than all the humans
But
on Earth, like we can't predict what will come next, and we just
or
maybe
just say
take it
something,
forward.
yeah, or just say something like I think it was Mythos 5 that Claude was claiming that it could break into government security or like Pentagon databases. It could break um into like bank servers. It could break into all these like supposedly hyper secure and unbreakable servers and unbreakable uh, softwares, I guess,
Oh,
and
I see what
company
you're saying.
infrastructures. Some of those things where, I mean, if you do have that level of destabilization that could occur from something like that getting released, where say you could have, you know, billions, if not trillions of dollars transferred away from people's bank accounts or crypto accounts or whatever it may be. How do you, I mean, how
Yeah,
does it get evaluated on the front end? And also, how does it get regulated itself?
that is a good question. I think the key to that is the companies who are building software in especially critical infrastructures, so things like government or kind of government adjacent and banks, really they probably should try to get access to these models a little bit before the general public. Um, But with that comes an argument of fairness. I mean, if there's some companies you allow to use it, not others, it's a little unfair to the ones you don't. But um,
Sure.
I think if the AI companies can come together in the US and just maybe come up with a standing policy of maybe giving a week or two advance if they believe that their new model will actually have a significant impact on risk to critical infrastructure and software more generally.
Right.
Though
Right.
I think that's going to become something that they do, and it seems like that's something they've already started to do. I don't think the government should really have a role in setting a specific time amount,
Yeah.
because I'd be pretty surprised if other countries like China were to do the same thing. And
They likely,
we would be kneecapping ourselves essentially in terms of the timing.
right. Yeah. They likely couldn't do it efficiently enough where it would actually be regulating it and getting the proper controls put in place before release or something like that.
Yeah,
But
then it just turns into the FAA, FDA kind of regime where it just slows everything down significantly. It'd be
yeah,
big government overreach, at least in my opinion.
yeah. I do tend to agree with that. And I also, yeah, wonder if it would even be able to be regulated properly at that point, or if it would just be if it would just be an optics based thing rather than a truly effective organization or department of the government that would keep these things from causing harm to the general population. But
Well, there's
yeah, I mean,
also things where where the things like the government is using AI themselves. like the
Oh,
flock
right.
cameras, and that's getting a lot of negative publicity recently. I
Yeah.
guess what are your thoughts on flock cameras, and is the benefit outweigh the risk of mass surveillance? What are your thoughts?
Well, I hate the idea in the beginning. I think that it's a massive infringement on the Fourth Amendment. I think that, uh, forget if it was Ben Franklin or if it was Thomas Jefferson who said that he who's willing to give up his freedom for a bit of safety deserves neither freedom nor safety. It was something along those lines.
Yeah, I
It's not
think that's right.
verbatim, but it's so perfect when it comes to this. Is I mean, in America nowadays, we focus so much on safety, but we also don't really realize like a lot of things that we think bring us safety. Is it more just performative, and is it actually bringing us safety? And also, I don't know. Even if one of the issues with the safety argument that I see with flock cameras in particular is it's just I I mean, like, what are we willing to accept before it then before you have to say, I'm not willing to accept these infringements because of my safety? Because a lot of people, they like to just outsource the liberties and the responsibilities that they have when they have those liberties onto others. And so it's like in the case of the flock cameras, they're like, well, I'm outsourcing my need to be a responsible citizen and maybe inform on people that are suspicious rather than just saying, well, like I'm just comfortable with having cameras all around. I
Yeah.
don't find that to be I mean, it doesn't seem like it would actually solve things a ton, like
Well, there's you
in the
you could
grand
you
scheme of things.
Well, you could make the argument that there's already, thousands or millions of cameras throughout the United States, like CCTV cameras,
Yeah,
stores, security cameras that are already filming you anyway. So you're out in public, people are seeing you, cameras are seeing you.
that's
What's the
true.
difference if something like Flock is recording your license plate?
In all fairness, yeah, it is like there's far more things that you could be angry about. I guess the fact that maybe it's centralized and the fact that it's controlled by municipalities. The CCTVs, a lot of those are, they can be requested by police if they're running an investigation or something like that, but they can't actively be monitored by them unless they have a probable cause to then go in and watch them. And that's where I see a little bit of an issue between the flock cameras and regular CCTV. I mean, it's very interesting too because about I think it was about 2 years ago, TSA started doing the face like the actual photos at security, and there are a lot of people that seem semi bothered by that, but they also a lot of people just kind of rationalize it by saying, well, there's cameras all around. And I guess in the airport, that's also a fair thing because the cameras, I'd assume, are controlled all by the airport administrators and they're watching you. So it's not that big of a deal. But when it comes to just having cameras all around your community and just constantly, maybe not being watched in some Orwellian sense, but having the having the possibility of just being tracked and I mean like one of the you see some of the stories of cops that are tracking down their ex-girlfriends and like ex-wives with these things, and that's a little bit sketchy. And I mean that's just the tip of the iceberg of what can be done when you have somebody with access to location tracking data like that. And I don't know what your thoughts are with it, but it it's kind of sketchy in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I assume it right now it is illegal if you're a cop using it for purposes of tracking your ex-girlfriend to stalk her down. I would think that has to
You'd
be
hope so,
illegal.
yeah.
I yeah, I feel like that's almost a side point, but that certainly should not be allowed.
Yeah.
I think the way it works now with just tracking the license plates. I mean, I know there's a camera and the camera is looking at the cars and picking up the license plate number, but I
Right.
think if Flock is to just pick up the license plate numbers, and if they're only to keep it for 30 days, which I believe they claim they do,
Mhm.
then I don't think it's that bad. I think there's already other things like speeding cameras and red light cameras that kind of have a similar function. Obviously, they're a little bit more few and far between, and they only take the picture for real if you if you blow the red light or you're speeding. Um, but I do think there's significant benefit to things like flock, where the rate of, you know, the percentage of times that car thefts get solved now is much higher, and the speed of which that happens is much faster. And so I do think and that could even be true for things like kidnapping. If there's an Amber
Yeah.
Alert and there's a car, I'm sure the resolution of Amber Alerts has gotten much higher now with flock cameras. Uh, so I do think there's significant upside to it, but you can just imagine the possible things that could come from something similar to this. Like if it turns out that Flock is recording the people that are walking by it, and using facial recognition and identifying them, and keeping track of people's movements, then I think that gets a little bit more sketchy. Um, and so you could easily see how this could go awry. And I think if there is a role for government regulation, it should be the government regulating itself to make sure that
Right.
the government itself is not usurping on its citizens
Yeah.
with using things like mass surveillance. Uh,
Right.
but I do think there's a fine line. I do think there will be plenty of good use cases for things like that, and they will have benefit. But I guess it's at what benefit is it worth the cost?
Right. Right. And I mean, you also wonder, does it just start to make smarter criminals? That's another thing that I wonder, where you ever you ever think about how, like, those people back in high school who had very strict parents, they were always the craftiest when it came to doing it, to, like, sneaking out and going to parties and doing things like that. It might just make it where it's like now it's even harder to find criminals, because you have this you you've put up like all these signals of, hey, we're watching you, and people might just develop new tactics. And that's where it's like, I guess they might develop the tactics no matter what to evade the cops. If they're a true criminal and it's not just like a simple mistake, then, but you wonder if you're actually like pushing that further and quicker as far as like the sophistication of the criminals, rather than keeping it a little
I
bit like
hear what
under
you're saying.
wraps.
I hear what you're saying, but I do think most criminals are pretty unsophisticated. Like the vast majority of crime, I don't think is very
Right.
sophisticated. I think it's generally people who didn't graduate high school, don't have a job, probably not the brightest of the society. So, I mean, I'm sure there might be some criminals that are able to outsmart it and outmaneuver it, but they probably
Sure.
would have to have some level of funding to start and uh, a certain IQ, truth be told.
Yeah.
Something like that would
Probably.
get to the point where it's getting pretty complicated. You'd probably have to have some insider information on where all these cameras are. Um, you would
But
probably,
think about on Waze and Apple Maps, it'll give you the points where it shows like the cops and the speed checks and things like that, or the hazards. Like I could totally see something being developed for like the flock cameras, where
I actually
it,
think someone did do that. I feel like I heard something about that, like a flock camera tracker or
yeah, a
something like that.
tracker. Yeah. I can
No,
totally see that actually. But
but that
yeah,
could easily fall into one of the use cases of things that should be regulated by the government. And then one of them should be the
sure.
government regulating its own uses. Because I mean, people fear countries like China and their mass surveillance state. I mean, is it really what they're doing? Is it really that different from flock cameras?
Right. I mean, we're technically going down the same path. It might just depend on who's actually controlling those. But I mean, yeah, you'd have to make a lot of this stuff like public information, and like you have to have like public databases showing like, which license plates were photographed. I mean, then
But then if it's public, then there's risks that the
that
stalkers
might
can.
be invasions of privacy, things like
I don't
that.
think
That's
you
what,
can make it public, right? I mean, because there's just so. If you were a serial killer, you would use that data to go track down people, right? You wouldn't
fair.
if it
Yeah.
were publicly available.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I just don't really. Yeah, if it is only privately available, though, then does the public even have any recourse against the government, and any way of any way of auditing the government's actual use of these things. Because I mean, like the government technically can't waterboard people, but the CIA finds ways to do it.
Yeah.
Uh, the government technically can't be uh, like there's a lot of things that the government can't do that they figure out ways to do. And
Yeah. I hear
there's
that.
yeah,
Yeah, that is a
it's
good question. I almost maybe you'd have to have like elected officials oversee the flock camera and just be like an auditor or something like that, or you'd have to have maybe some sort of auditing system, like
yeah,
how companies get audited. Maybe there'd be something like that, or the
yeah,
government gets audited on something like that by a third party that
right.
almost has to like prove there's no conflicts of interest or something like that.
That seems like the only way where you have somebody that's elected or somebody that's appointed for short terms to then actually show whether this is being used properly, whether it's uh, or whether it's being used perniciously. That's that's kind of a scary thought. But
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's difficult. It's just like, when with all these technological innovations, it just seems like the cat's out of the bag, and then you don't really know how to if you know if society ever reverts back to just being like simpler, where it's just like, you live in a trusting community where like people just take care of each other, or you're aware of who the person who's going to commit crimes will be. And then if a crime is committed, then everybody points a finger at him. And it's not a big deal because everyone just knows where to go with that. But that's difficult. And I don't know if we can really ever get to a point, given the population size of the United States and the population density, particularly in cities, where it's, the, you can only develop such a community like that if you live in New York City, or if you live in
Yeah.
Houston, or if you live in Chicago.
Yeah,
So
there's really no way of ensuring that or there's no way for you to know everybody. I mean, how many people could you know? You could maybe know loosely 1,000 people in your town or something,
yeah,
if
you gotta be
you're like
really
the most
social to
social.
maintain that many. Yeah.
The but that does bring us to a good point though, because when we're talking about AI and technology, I feel like, at least people will act like that people just don't communicate, they don't socialize the same amount that they used to, and uh there's certain ways we're almost enslaving ourselves to the technology. So there's,
Totally.
would would you think do you think there's certain, I know we talked about this on the last episode, but there's certain skills that people lose over time as a result of technology. For example, long division after the calculator, um, getting around with maps after the GPS, growing food, after food's been growing on an industrial scale. There's just, it seems like a lot of the time that these things have worked out for the better for humanity. There's just, been better accuracy getting to to the direct or the location you want to get to a GPS. There's more food than ever. It's easier to do math than ever. Do you
Yeah.
think? But do you think AI is a whole new, uh, like such a different technology that pattern will not continue, and there will be certain things that just get skills that get wiped out? What are your
Yes.
thoughts? You do?
Yes. In short, I do. And it's scary to believe that, but because I mean, this one of the biggest capabilities of AI is just aggregating so much data. And with the amount of data that's on the internet, you can effectively find and learn most skills that have been learned by people in the past, whether that be academic skills, whether that be how to throw a baseball, whether that be uh, how to forge a certain alloy, how to do different things like that. And the the difficulty is, if you don't have like an apprentice and master kind of model, then like where does it do you start to have it where like the knowledge is held up in the knowledge banks of the AI, but we also don't have somebody to physically teach us, you could make the argument that the robots that come around in the future, the Tesla bots or whatever, that they might be able to teach them how to do the physical movements or how to actually explain things to the human. But I certainly worry that it's we're putting too much stock into a single hive mind of a computer and just expecting that we will be able to just draw upon those skills and remember them whenever it's necessary. And I mean, most of these skills, if you don't work them, it's like a muscle, you lose them. I mean, in the same way that if you stop playing basketball for a while, you're not going to make a free throw the first time that you come back and shoot one. It's just not going to happen. I mean, I'd be curious to see what your thoughts are on it too, because it's one of those where it seems so great to be able to just outsource all our knowledge to a technology or a pseudo brain, if you will. And then when it comes down to the actual the actual necessity of using it and tapping that knowledge, like, do we have the capability of actually regaining that as humans, or do we even have some other kind of machine that can reproduce it for us? And I mean, if the robots aren't sophisticated enough at that point to tap into it, and we're not, and we haven't learned it from somebody else, then what happens to the skill? I
I
think,
guess
my
you could
opinion,
argue.
it goes away, and
I agree.
that's yeah,
But I think the counter argument to that would be if there's just robots able to do anything, produce anything, and Elon Musk has made this argument too, then everything just becomes incredibly cheap. There's pretty much infinite resources that could be tapped, infinite things that could be built at essentially a cost that's approaching the cost of energy. And if these things can build more solar panels, build nuclear plants, then in theory it could increase the energy, also bringing the limit of that close to zero, so that things get to be incredibly cheap and things become abundant.
sure.
But the issue with that is, I mean, imagine if there's a major war that breaks out or a major natural catastrophe and something like all of the data centers in the world were to get, blown up, a lot of the energy were to get destroyed, or the things that create the energy get destroyed. And then there's a situation where we have zero redundancy and there's no people to do the tasks that need to get done. And then therefore, all of a sudden we go from having unlimited resources and infinite things to having no one who could build anything and essentially zero resources, because all the skills that have been learned throughout human history have essentially been
Right.
lost.
Yeah. We get sent back to like the Stone Age where we have to learn how to make tools again. We have to learn how to, make a hammer. We have to learn how to make nails. We have to learn how to do all these things. And while it would be great having the robots, one of the other things too about that is uh what's is there still value to competition, and is there still value to being being able to outproduce somebody in some other way? If the robots are so efficient and they're so cost effective that it then makes it impossible for humans to compete in some way, doesn't beyond just the cost, it also removes a lot of like value that people find in their lives. Find a lot of people that derive plenty of value out of their job. It could be something as it could be something like a bus driver who derives a ton of value out of just saying hi to the kids that hop on the bus every day. It could be something like a police officer who derives a ton of value from solving a murder, or from, saving people from a dangerous situation. There's I mean, those are certainly like more human examples, but there's a lot of people that derive value out of working their computer job, working their desk job. And if the robots could do all those things and they could do all the factory jobs, then are we starting to lose something that makes us more human, which is just our desire to actually build things and get things done and do things well? That's another question I'm curious of your opinion on.
I mean, I do think it's almost like something that might be completely distinct to human nature in a way. And I almost think it's biological, it's built into us, like serotonin or that's the
Yeah, part of our whole
hormone.
reward system. Yeah,
Yeah, so we have a built-in reward system kind of around building things, growing over time, getting better, um, having good relationships, things that are built over a long period of time. Uh, and I think there is a fair argument to be made if the robots were to take every single job on the planet, were to do every single task imaginable. But I think there's certain things where humans have a distinct role. Uh, and I forget, I don't remember who said it, but I heard someone talking and said something along the lines of, yeah, most people, we're not growing our own food now, but there is something nice about someone who grew some plants in their garden and cooks up a nice meal with it. It just tastes a little
right.
bit better. There's like an artisanal effect to it. So
Yeah.
I think there's some things that even
I'll
if
pat
there's
myself on the
jobs.
back for that. That's me. No, I'm
Oh,
kidding.
was that you who said that?
No, I'm kidding. But I do grow some plants on my balcony. So yeah.
Yeah, but there's things like that where there's almost there's things that even if robots can do everything in the world for cheaper, more efficiently than a human can, I think there will still be tasks where there's the human touch on things and the small
Special
fine
craft
detail and
element.
yeah, the
Yeah.
craft element where people can derive a lot of joy from and
So
I
you could
think
almost
just
make the argument it's like the difference between like a Toyota and like a Ferrari, where you know that the Ferrari was handmade and there was somebody that was inspecting everything and hand did the paint, and that there's a real craft element and there's a real attention to detail in it, and just a human touch that you can't replicate some other way.
yeah, when you go to the Italian restaurant and you see the old lady in the window rolling out the pasta by hand, you just know that
Oh,
place, and you just know the
oh
place is going to
man.
be better than the takeout Italian place that's pumping out their boxed pasta all day.
Yeah.
There's something to it, and I think there's you think you kind of already see that with AI, things like design, like website design,
You
where
do.
there's just
It
the AI can
converges
build it
into
fast.
just yeah.
Yeah, the AI can build it faster. It can do it more efficiently. The code might be cleaner, but at the end of the day, people prefer how the human built website looks. There's certain craft elements, like you were saying, that I
Right.
think humans have that AI couldn't. And I think that will probably be how people can, if we even get to the situation where the price of everything goes to zero, the cost of energy goes to zero, and the amount of tasks one has to does go to zero. I think there will be certain craft things like making the food and designing websites where humans will get satisfaction and have a role.
Yeah. I see that. I don't know about you, but I certainly see it with writing nowadays. You can
Yeah,
very
that's another
easily
great
tell.
example.
Yeah, you can very easily tell what's written by AI because it's technically correct in every way, but it's so lacking in character. It's
Mhm.
there's and I not that, you can turn Claude into a different mode and say, hey, like write like this or write like that, but there's a real specialty you can tell to a human that can write well and just has a way of communicating that for whatever reason, I just don't know if you could. Yeah, it's very possible that machines can just never get to that point because it's just a human views things just differently in that way, and
Yeah,
that might be what actually like brings the beauty to, or and like continues to bring people like fulfillment in a world where they might be they might not have jobs or they might you know they might be lacking in purpose from other avenues because that purpose is more efficiently fulfilled by a robot and an AI model.
yeah.
So
Art is in the imperfection, right?
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So the
Yeah,
human writing's less perfect, but we all
yeah,
like it more.
for
So,
sure. Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
do think that brings up a point because right now we're talking about a bunch of craft things and humans' opinions on stuff. But there's a lot of talk these days about how, students are just cheating on all their tests. They're not learning. Uh,
Yeah.
there's things that employees are just using Claude or ChatGPT to do their work. And so people just aren't learning or aren't thinking. And, everyone worries about the next generation with the AI. What do you think about that?
I mean, the time to worry, I felt like was 5 years ago when I've seen kids with iPads on leashes in airports. Like, I don't know. Like these kids, it's unfortunate to say, but like I feel like a lot of these kids' attention spans, which were already messed up, and you know, I don't think that AI is making them better, at least the attention spans or the reading scores or the math scores or anything like that. But it also doesn't seem like the school districts across the United States have taken it very seriously in these kids learning at all to begin with. It seems like they pass a lot of kids where it's like in the public school systems, they come out of high school and might be at a ninth grade reading level. That's
If
you know,
that.
if that, and that's an unfortunate circumstance. And not that not that Claude and Chat helping these kids study are going to make it any better. I just don't even know if you can make it worse at this point. That's the other question that I have is can you even make it that bad? Like, I mean, if your 15-year-old can't read green eggs and ham, there's a much worse problem than Claude, I feel like.
But the thing is, how are they using Claude or ChatGPT if they can't read or reason at all?
You know, they might just be copying and pasting. There are plenty of assignments nowadays that I'd assume are online that are coming in PDFs that are I mean, I'd assume that some of these interfaces where they do their homework on can protect against copy and pasting, but even then, I mean, they can
They
see
can
the
just
letters on
retype.
the keyboard and they can just retype it. Yeah. I I do wonder though, like it seems like critical thinking has been a lack of focus in the school system for at least uh at least since you and I were in high school. I I mean, I can't really speak for this. I did go to a relatively good public school, but there were plenty of people that probably got passed and didn't really do much in the way of work and learn much in the way of material. And I mean that was at like a relatively good public school, albeit a California public school. So take of that what you will. But
I mean, I also have I probably have a skewed opinion on it or a skewed view on it because I mean, I went to a pretty good private school in DC. There was only 80 kids in the grade, and
yeah,
um, I think most of the people there actually did learn because if you didn't, you'd get weeded out pretty quickly over the years.
yeah,
I mean, and I saw that happen. So you kind of had to be on top of it there, or else you wouldn't be allowed to stay at the school.
yeah,
Um, so I think they did, but I think a lot of schools, and you could see it in places like Baltimore, Maryland, for example, not far from where I am, where I think it was not one student in the Baltimore County was at grade level for math, or it probably wasn't quite that bad, but it was
no, I
something,
think I heard it was that.
or
Yeah.
maybe it was one of the schools in the district had 0 students at grade level math, and
Yeah.
it's
I don't know how
it's
that's
crazy.
possible. I mean, you almost wonder in this case, it's like, would these kids learn better with AI? Because how bad can the teachers be that not a single one can get up to grade level with math? It's not even that like there's got to be one math whiz in one of those classes, but maybe maybe it's
They
just
get
that
weeded out.
others, yeah, the
They
other
go to a
students are
public
so
school.
disrupted or they get
Right.
plucked out to go to a private school. Like it's many of those things are possible, but yeah,
I
I
do
mean,
think that's some of it. Like I think a lot of the schools, if you go to a shitty public school in Baltimore, Maryland, I think there's a lot of maybe even Catholic schools and private schools that
right.
will help a kid out and let him go for free. And
Yeah,
especially if he's good at sports too, then it just makes it an even easier sell to the school.
for sure. Yeah,
Um,
I could totally see that. I
but I
mean,
do think people are getting a little bit worse at thinking for themselves. But I
Oh
think
yeah.
there's an argument that some people might be getting better at thinking because they have something like ChatGPT that has all this intelligence where they can bounce ideas off of it, go back and forth, go over counter arguments and try to improve their argument. And I think it might create a divergence almost. The top tier of people will almost get better at thinking and better at using these tools and do more better critical thinking, whereas others who just don't maybe don't have the care or just don't have the education or the background or the parents to show them the direction. I
It's
think it might
possible
get
there's just
worse.
people that care to outsource their critical thinking to it rather than use it as a tool to test their beliefs and maybe force them to consider other perspectives. I mean, if you use it as a real like stress test for your own beliefs and make it where your prompt is more centered around something that is asking it to prove you wrong rather than to reinforce your beliefs or to just give you information if you don't know about a topic at all, then that's always possible. But it would probably take somebody with a decent amount of intellectual humility and very almost zero ego when it comes to this. Because I mean, anybody also who's smart, technically, like I don't see a lot of these people as wanting to listen to Claude or chat when it comes to like what the answers are on these things. I mean, if you have uh, if you have truly unique opinions, you probably don't want to go to it or use it for anything for that matter. At least certainly not for your writing or for something that will help you convey your ideas, maybe with the editing. But
I hear what you're saying. I do think if you're a contrarian, and I do think it's necessary to be contrarian, if you go to an LLM, it's going to give you the most not or the least contrarian answer possible, just because it's trained off the data of the internet. So it's going to go with the two tokens next to each other that have the closest
right,
connection. And the ones that are going to have the closest connections are going to be the ones that are most popular things said on the internet. And so
right.
I think that's true. And to the point that you made about uh, certain people being lazy and outsourcing their critical thinking to these models, I think that might be a default of most people because I'm pretty sure the brain is the muscle that uses the most energy in the body, at least for its square volume or whatever. And so and the human body wants to conserve energy. And so if there's a way to offload something, especially if it's the thing that will have the biggest impact on energy or, the amount of energy spent, then I think it would be human nature in some ways to offload it. So you almost have to fight against that.
It'll be an efficiency machine, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it'll go to the most efficient, easiest route. And so
Yeah.
if people just assume that's the best way to do it or a way to do it, then they're going to go to that route of just offloading it completely.
Yeah.
I think there's certain people, and it almost might have, this might be one. It's a good situation to have some ego involved in it. That if you think you know better, then you'll still hold opinions and think for yourself. But if you just are the type of guy that always goes with the flow and is a sheep, then you're
Yeah.
probably going to be the type of person that just goes with whatever the AI says. So I
Sure.
think, I mean, and sometimes you might be right to listen to the AI and other times not. But I do think there are certain people that would just always go to the baseline and the easiest thing.
There certainly are. And that's, like you said, that's nothing new. And that might just be so deeply ingrained just based on the actual power consumption of the brain or the actual energy consumption of the brain. Um, it also, yeah, I mean, it's been demonstrated just by you look at where people actually get their information and where they outsource their critical thought to. It could be Twitter, it could be Instagram. I mean, if you're a boomer, it's probably Facebook, and you probably enjoy just arguing with other people and not changing your mind and just whatever Fox or whatever CNN or whoever tells you what, you're just gonna believe them and just get into arguments. That's still the funniest thing to me. Just seeing boomers go at it on Facebook, but yeah, no, it's not something that honestly AI is just a symptom of a deeper problem. And I don't know if you can call it a problem. I mean, like humans do have these humans do develop these behaviors for survival purposes. I mean, if you can't just sit there and think all day long. You have to get to an answer and you have to get there quick. And if, even if it's not something that's life threatening, it's something that will cause you to be mauled by a lion if you don't make the right decision. It's still something where a lot of people would rather just turn off their brain and just have something spoon fed to them. Now, you could make the case that you could blame those people for being lazy, but then could you also expect them to have that responsibility and feel the need to go off and actually develop an opinion for themselves where they could get to the answer in 2 minutes, or they could get to it through a bunch of critical thought and developing all these mental models in a matter of 3-4 hours. It's a very reasonable trade-off to just say, well, if I'm going to get to the same answer, let me get there in 2 minutes than 5 hours. And unfortunately, it depends on the perspective that you take, but unfortunately or fortunately, that's the way most humans operate. And you just simply can't blame them for it. I think when it comes to kids that are in schools, that's where it's a bigger problem because they don't even know how to think at all. Like they've never been trained on their brains have never been trained to think from day one. Then it's difficult because similar to the skill loss that we were talking about before, they don't have that to fall back on. Their default option and their only option is just what does AI say? And if that's the only case, then you don't really have any ability to do anything for yourself. That's where you actually become a true slave, is if you don't have any way of verifying something just by yourself, off of your own knowledge, off of your own mental models, off of your own ability to think critically. And I guess that should be what makes us a little bit more nervous about the future of AI, particularly when it comes to learning.
Yeah. No, I do think that's fair. And if especially for the people growing up now, if they never think for themselves and everything gets answered by AI, they never have to do the digging into it themselves, then I do think there's some risk that their ability to think critically could be less. Though if they're smart with the AI and they're asking good questions and they're checking the sources of the AI, then I think they might have some ability to possibly be better than our generation or generations before. So I mean, it's one of those things we'll see with time. I think it also could be a divergence in them. Some are better and some are worse. But
It definitely will be a divergence with it. You can't really say upon what lines that'll be drawn, if that'll just be a socioeconomic thing or if it'll be like a cultural thing or what it might be. But it's certainly it's certainly for parents that are wealthier, I'd assume. They probably push their kids to actually go to things like private schools, Catholic schools. And I mean, the Catholic Church is not like too fond on AI. And so I'd assume that Catholic schools generally would probably take a much more traditionalist view on this, where they're going to teach traditional curriculum with traditional tools and probably find ways to ban this in the classroom. And
when you think about the human intelligence on like the whole as opposed to the individual, I think it's kind of an interesting case too, because when you were making a point earlier about how a lot of people would rather get the news in 1 minute and have their mind made up in 1 minute than they would look into it for a whole day and get deep into it. But I think the thing is right now, even before AI, most people have a thing that they care about and a thing or two that they go very deeply on, and they'll spend time reading that. And then most of the other things, they'll just, listen to someone they trust and just essentially take on their opinion, almost like it's, some mimetic nature of humans that they just want to copy what other people think, and fit in with the herd, go with the crowd. But I think when you look at it, on a higher level, when you're looking down at all the humans and all of their individual intelligences, then I think it's almost like a node of smarts. And I think with the AI, people can get even smarter on certain subjects. And have a great debate partner 24/7 that they wouldn't otherwise have. And so if you look at the whole node of all the intelligent people in the world, or all the people in the world and their intelligence, then the total sum of the pie of intelligence in each subject might get deeper for humans. Um,
That's
while
yeah. I didn't think about that. That's
Yeah, I
a
mean,
very good point. Yeah.
but
I
you
don't
know, it's
really
one of
have
those
any
things
rebuttal to that at all. I don't see why it's necessarily wrong. Yeah.
yeah, but with, I guess kind of moving on now, there's, in some ways humans can get better by, talking with the AI, but it seems like new models can be built in a similar way by taking the responses from current frontier models like from Anthropic and OpenAI and using it or distilling it to create their own model that's much cheaper and works pretty similarly. That's
Yeah.
been a pretty common technique in China. I know DeepSeek's been accused of distilling I believe was Anthropic's model when it first came out. When you asked what model this was, it would tell you that it was an Anthropic model.
Mhm.
So that was pretty good evidence that some distilling happened.
Yeah.
And I think it's still a very open argument from the ethical point of view if this is, if it's stealing from these models or if it's not. And so I was wondering what your opinion on that is.
I don't really think that it's stealing and that's kind of I mean, seeing the tech world, it seems like stealing of ideas is pretty rampant. I mean, it's pretty well understood that Zuckerberg stole the Winklevoss twins' idea. He may have executed on it much better than they did, or that they would have, but basic ideas get co-opted, stolen all the time. And it's honestly not something that's exclusive to technology either. But you also just think, I mean, uh, if you have like a really good professor in college and you start really picking their brain and you just pick their brain perfectly like on one subject and get to the point where you can develop like their mental model of the world on that subject really well, have you stolen their knowledge? I mean, I guess that's just a way of anthropomorphizing it and just humanizing it. But technically, uh, I guess it depends on if you view information as something that can be stolen. I mean, you could view an algorithm as something that can be stolen, sure, but um, if you can reverse engineer that algorithm, then is it something that it can be stolen? I
Well,
mean,
would you say, I think you could kind of distinguish because if you were to talk, if you were just talking to your professor openly and your professor knew you were talking to him and asking questions and your professor was giving you the answers to it, I don't think anyone would dispute that's a fair transfer of information. However, if you were to break into your professor's office and steal his notes, would that be a fair, or would that be an ethical and, you know,
I guess
legal way
maybe,
of getting information?
yeah. I mean, in that case, it probably wouldn't be. I just wonder though. Well, yeah, I mean, the information is all the same that they're getting, or the possible information that they could get. I guess when it comes to what we were talking about with the books that they were buying up in bulk and then just scanning and putting into the model to train, that might be a little bit different, and that might be something where they actually have exclusive ability to use that. But as far as the web scraping and data scraping abilities on the internet, that's pretty wide open, and that's where I guess it might just depend on the kind of information that is being taken. Because if it's information from, say, a copyrighted source, or it's information that is exclusively held by one source, then is it something that can technically be, or is it something that can be stolen in the same way that, or excuse me, is that then stealing if you get that information in for use in something that the the entity that you get it from would not approve of? I
Yeah.
mean,
I see. Like if something's copyrighted, if you were to input that into the creation of a model, would that be
Right.
stealing? Uh, and I
It's-
do think I almost think we talked about this in our last episode, but I do think that kind of gets to the point of how the law defines it in a way, because
right.
and I know we talked about with the books, if so long as you're not doing something like buying the book, scanning it, and then selling PDFs of it, like that's clearly a copyright violation. Um,
Right.
then if you're allowed to learn about the book and write about the book and write essays about a book and write blogs about the book and the things you learned about the book and make videos about that book. So I suppose from that point of view, it's not much different from it would having a model train on that book wouldn't be much different. And
Right. I guess it just depends on the what it actually can prompt or what it actually can output, what the output can be. So
yeah, and then these frontier models are all trained or mostly trained on internet data from that other people created.
right.
So
Yeah.
in some ways, the distilling of a model is almost just like a derivative of that. It's
Yeah.
you're taking the derivative of the data on the internet that the frontier lab models trained on and getting the Chinese models or whoever's or distilling these models essentially just training on the derivative of the data that the original
Yeah.
frontier models trained on.
Yeah. I mean, the only person who seems to get a little bit screwed in it is the original author. That's why it's kind of funny for like Anthropic to be getting mad about it. It's like, wait, you guys are just like, I mean, you're basically doing the exact same thing with what
Yeah,
you're doing with the data scraping. You're just, it's just a different source. But yeah,
exactly.
that's
Exactly.
it. It
That's
is
why
like,
everyone's calling them out on it too, I think because
yeah, the hypocrisy is pretty funny, actually. Yeah.
yeah, they become all moral when their book is involved in it.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. No, it is like it is pretty interesting. Like just because uh, Dario doesn't seem to really like understand like the optics of who he is. Like, I mean, he's viewed with much less trust than he might think, and it's kind of funny because when he is calling for all the regulation around AI models, it's like everybody looks at him just thinking you're doing this to protect yourself and protect your lead right now. I don't know of anybody that's looking at him when he's spewing about open source being a threat to the AI landscape and a threat to the public and thinking, oh, he's saying that open source is dangerous because it actually is dangerous or it's just dangerous to his bottom line. I
Well,
guess
you,
what
you
are your
might make an
thoughts on
argument. I think you could make an argument that open source models are that could be dangerous. That being said, I don't think there's much of an argument to be made that there's anything we could do to regulate it, at least as the
right?
United States of America, because the leader in open source models right now is China. So
Yeah,
regulating open source models in the United States will essentially have a negligible effect on the risks of open source models in the first place.
yeah,
And so I think that gets back to the original point of our whole podcast here today, where regulating AI is very difficult to do. And to any extent the government should have regulation around it, it should be something that can be shown is not going to slow down the rate of development and
yeah.
rate of improvement of new models, because the only thing we're going to do by regulating it is we're going to slow down ourselves and let China or another country take the lead on us.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't seem like much regulation. You wonder if it actually will have any efficacy in what it's intended to do.
Yeah,
Also,
yeah, and
that's
second, third, fourth order effects of that regulation.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't seem like something that actually yeah, regulation of it. It's like how, why, when. Uh, everybody's open to this, but the devil's in the details, and you wonder if I mean I don't know if there's a single person in government who I feel like actually like understands AI. And that's spoken to somebody who like I still like I read about neural networks all the time and I'm like I still don't get them. Like and I don't think a lot of people who talk about it really understand it. And so if you don't understand it in any way, how are you actually going to regulate that? The thing is, anybody who understands this goes and gets a job making it way more money than they would as a congressional staffer or is somebody working in, the whatever administration is in office in their cabinet. Like, I mean, I guess you could say that like they have like David Sachs is well, Sachs is crypto, I think. And but or he might
Yeah,
be
he's a
AI
crypto
also.
and AI czar, I think. I
Yeah.
think he's. I mean,
Yeah.
the thing is, I don't think you have to fully understand the exact details of how neural nets work. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
but I,
true.
I think I think you have to understand high level things about how they work. Like I think you have to know with neural nets that the most important thing with it is the amount of compute you have, and that how the models improve, at a logarithmic rate
Mhm.
to the amount of compute that's added to it. So I mean, I think you have to understand that the compute is probably the most important thing, and then a lot of all the stuff that all the research that's come after that is almost negligible to the effect of that, and that uh, in the with transformer models, it's the more structure it's almost like a calculation of the amount of structure that you give it to start to learn from at the beginning. Uh,
Yeah.
is inverse to the amount of compute that you're training it on. So if there's more compute, you'd want to give it less structure so that it comes up with its own ways of learning and
Yeah.
ultimately can learn more, better, and be more of an expert. However, if you have less GPUs, you want to give it more structure so that it's able to actually pick these things up quicker, maybe
Yeah.
learning them a little less. And I think anything outside of that is pretty negligible effect. Um,
Mhm.
but on the high level, there's certain things that if you understand them, and they're almost philosophical in the ways that we've been talking about today, where I don't think the politicians understand it. I don't think the vast majority of the population understands it.
Yeah.
And as a result, even if the politicians did understand it, they would have to play to what the people who are voting for them want. And I think the
Right.
vast majority of people just don't understand it well enough to
Right.
to make
Yeah.
it their opinion.
Yeah, the general public seems to get hung up a little bit more on like these paper tigers, like the data center build outs, where it's like very few, you know, I wouldn't really care to have a data center in my backyard. I'm a big fan of nuclear power. I I'd be fine with it being a mile away from my house, but maybe not right in my backyard, a nuclear reactor at least. But I mean, those things are a little bit lower stakes as far as like the regulations with this go, and as far as like what the actual consequences of it might be. And so
Well, did you see what Vivek Ramaswamy recently proposed about
no.
data centers? So, long story short, he proposed that if you want to build a new data center in Ohio, where he's running for governor, that
Mhm.
the people building out the data center will have to essentially provide free electricity to the neighboring people and free water or something like that, as essentially this is,
As a
we're going to
way
be
to
there might
okay.
be noise pollution, and whatnot. So this is essentially our thank you to them and give some incentive for people to want to live near a data center, or
Yeah.
at least keep some of the value of the home of the place near the data center to the extent that the real estate value would go down.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was kind of looking at it from the perspective of that it would almost be to compensate them for the electricity increases that they would otherwise be taking on. But I also see that point there. That being said, it also would just, you know, even if I had those things taken care of and I was able to and I was a and I had a house that was in an otherwise quaint neighborhood. It was pretty. And then all of a sudden a bunch of noise pollution came in and a bunch of construction was going on. I'd still be pretty annoyed. Like, even though my water was cheap or free for that matter, and even though my electricity was free. I don't know how you, again, back to the regulation, it doesn't seem like there's any effective way to regulate it. And I don't know how that could really be done. That being said, also, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, one of the biggest data centers in the US, at least, is in one of the richest counties in Virginia, which is one of the richest counties in America. And I mean, it seems like people have figured out ways to live with this, albeit it wasn't maybe being built out at the scale that all these other ones are being out at currently. But it still is an interesting case study because it doesn't really seem like something that is going to cause much material difference in people's lives. It could, but I guess it depends on the scale of the data center. And the only regulation I really see as being like understandable is regulation that keeps the costs for the utilities for the surrounding population generally stable rather than seeing spikes because of the new build outs of power plants that are required to power the data centers because they, are taking up, 5-10 gigawatts of power. Or
Yeah.
I
I mean,
mean,
I
like,
don't live near one of these data centers, but if I understand it all correctly, the noise of the data center comes from the fans and the cooling of it. And
yeah,
so I think more and more data centers are moving toward a liquid cooling solution anyway. So I
yeah,
think the fan noise solution is probably one of those temporary things that people are dealing with and complaining about now that ultimately
right,
won't be an issue in the long term.
right.
But but I think just the political backlash and the fact that even if that were to not be the issue, I still think people would be against data centers in their neighborhood. It kind of makes Elon's data centers in space start to sound a lot more reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely does. The one thing I was actually going to bring up with that's kind of interesting is it seems like a genius idea until like one of the things that I was reading about with it. It was actually from, if I'm not mistaken, it was Michael Burry's Substack. And oddly enough, he's not a big fan of Tesla or of Elon, but Elon
Yeah.
seems to be a big fan of his. I don't know why. But but yeah, he brought up a good point, or he was referencing an article that made this point where it was saying that one of the difficulties with building data centers in space is you'd think that because it's so cold in space that they would actually be good at then regulating the temperature of the GPUs. But the problem is that there's no medium in space to then draw the heat off the GPUs. And
That
so
is
it's
true.
actually more difficult to cool them. And so then how you get the power to maybe pump some liquid around them to have some kind of a heat exchanger. I it, that's where I haven't done the math on it, but it almost sounds like it'd be more costly to do that, especially when you consider the fact that you have to launch these onto a rocket into orbit. You need power for them to continue orbiting. There's you can get a certain amount of that from solar, but it's not cheap to launch a rocket into space. And it'd be smart, but I mean, Elon is also a champion of just being able to throw so much capex behind something and people just believing his ideas long enough that eventually it does work out. I mean, he's a
Yeah.
very tough person to bet against, and I would never bet against him on this idea, even though it does sound so outlandish and crazy that he might actually make it work. It it does
Yeah.
seem possible, but
I think I was just doing like a quick search on it. It does seem like there is actually some ways to transfer heat in space. Apparently it's thermal, it transfers out as thermal radiation. So maybe there is a way. I don't know if it would be as cost effective as people are making it sound, or
it's
Elon is
just
making
not
it sound.
super efficient, I don't think.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, because if you have one of the reasons that liquid cooling on Earth is very effective is because it's much more like there's much more medium to then take away the heat from it. And so it's much more dense in that circumstance. And yeah, but
Well, there's
when it
also the issue
comes,
with latency too with the data centers in space because it's so far away and it can travel at the speed of light, but so can the
yeah,
data centers on Earth, which are a small fraction of the distance between here and
yeah,
space.
yeah. I mean, that would definitely be something that would, you know, Well, one of the things that I wonder is how many data centers do we actually need? I mean, there's got to be a huge amount. Obviously, as we were talking about this last episode, Google up their forecast for the amount of AI capex that they're going to have in 2027 from the range of 195 billion to 205 billion in 2027 alone. Uh, I don't. What is the kind of adoption that all these companies are forecasting? To go back to a topic of last episode, for them to be putting all this money into building all these new data centers and trying to think of every new possibility of where to build them, how to cool them, how to power them, uh, all these different options for them. It's got to be insane because there's still, it doesn't seem like it's been difficult to find a lot of people using AI right now. And I'm also not seeing a lot of outages when it comes to Claude or when it comes to chat or anything like that.
I do think they have some issues with outages, actually. I think that's one of the complaints about them. Yeah.
Maybe I'm just lucky. Yeah.
No, I think it's one of those things where with most software, they want you to have like I think AWS is like 3 or 4 nines of reliability,
Uptime.
which means you have uptime, which means they have like a 99.999 or 9.999 percent uptime. Whereas I think Claude and I think OpenAI is a little better, where I think they might have like 2 nines. Claude might have 2 nines, and OpenAI might have like 3 nines. So they're not quite as reliable as most other forms of software, and I think it is mostly because of the compute bottleneck right now.
I see.
But I do think there's also been shown to be demand for smarter and smarter models too.
Yeah. So the training is where that, yeah.
And then and then when models get smarter and cheaper, then there's more demand for it on the inference side with Jevons paradox, and the cheaper things get, the more demand there is for it. So I
Right.
think that's kind of where it's coming from, and it does seem like the demand for AI is really, really been like endless right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It does seem extremely endless. You
And you
know,
could picture
you
where we
think,
go from here, right? It would just be like AI agents running businesses and like spawning up a bunch of other agents. And right now,
oh,
it's really just
100%.
mostly just people using one agent, and maybe that agent spins up like a couple other like researching agents or and whatnot. But you could see how this could just keep going further. At least I can.
Well, anytime you hop on, yeah, like anytime I hop on Reddit or, I mean, yeah, anytime I go on Reddit, I'll see somebody that's like talking about, oh, like I have these 5 agents in production right now. Like I have my front end design agent, I have my back end agent, I have my like data scraping agent, I have my like pipelines agent, well, like all these different things. And uh those are obviously for like development specific tasks, but you could totally see it in the future being something where it's like you have a marketing campaign agent, or you have an accounts payable agent, or you have an FP&A agent, you have a or you have maybe a real estate development agent, and it's you could probably get to a point where you just segregate duties to be like small enough responsibilities for an agent to then handle, and then it can just slowly expand out. And you could totally see how something like accounts payable is very understandable, how that could be just delegated over to an agent. I mean, if you have one dedicated inbox for your companies to send their invoices to, if they're a vendor of yours, then it can push it out to the respective departments or like to the respective stakeholders, and somebody can just approve these, and then it can input them and pay them, and just have like some approvals layer or something like that. Then,
Mhm.
and I mean, same thing with marketing agent, same thing with like an accounting agent, like a staff accountant agent. It could then just, input all these transactions, uh, do all these month end journal entries, send it to like a controller agent for review, or maybe just an actual controller at that point. I mean, hopefully you still want some humans in the mix, but yeah, you could. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of companies that may not understand the full scope of what what they can actually do with AI agents. And maybe it's difficult because it's not really, it doesn't seem to be marketed too much.
Yeah. I think, companies move slow, and in time, if they don't pick it up, they'll get replaced by people who do.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm kind of surprised. Like, obviously, consulting companies, they love to talk in buzzwords, but it doesn't seem like a lot of them actually have offered up a lot of real solutions when it comes to AI to like big businesses, or at least they haven't in a way that they would actually get adopted. Seems like a lot of these companies will will talk about very amorphous ways to implement it for efficiency or what have you, and then they can't really make it useful. I mean, you have a little bit of a background in that, so I'm kind of curious what you see with that. That was a little bit before ChatGPT,
Yeah.
or
It was right when it came. I was working at UI right when that came out. The I mean, I know that they're trying to sell them on stuff like that. I think a lot of the of regular companies, non-tech companies, they might have tried something with AI 4 years ago or something at GPT-4 maybe, and it just wasn't that good. And a lot of the executives and people in the companies got pretty demoralized on it, and now they just don't want to spend. I also think it's one of those things too where a lot of these companies I think would rather just have their staff build out these automations on their own, because
yeah,
now that people have Claude Code, why they could just tell Claude Code to build it out, and maybe they don't need these consultants. But I do think I do think in time these consultants will get some business, and maybe if it's not EY and Accenture, it'll be some newcomers that come around.
yeah, yeah, definitely. There'll probably there will probably be more specialized consulting companies on the specific applications of this in the future. At least that's something that I could see, where
Yeah,
they really hitch their wagon to communicating how to use agents to maybe, for a growing company, keep them from having to expand the staff and the overhead as much as they expected in, or as much as they may have needed to in the past. And then for maybe a mature company, be able to cut staff or be able to cut hours or something like that. So,
yeah, exactly. Well, I think
yeah,
that's a great episode, Reagan. I think we had a good talk today. We talked a lot about how the government's role in regulating AI. We talked about the risks of AI, and the risk of enslaving ourselves to AI. We covered distilling models and open source and closed source models. And we got really deep on both philosophically and technically, into how this all works. So
yeah,
I think we had a good talk today. Um,
yeah.
and we should save a little bit of our conversations for next time.
Great chat. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Looking
good
forward to
talk.
next time. All
Yeah,
right. Thanks,
sweet.
Kevin.
Thank you.